Fauci pleads the fifth. Data centers react to criticism. Another state bans cell phones in schools. Tennessee claws back some grant dollars. And the taxpayer cost per vote. Welcome to the States, powered by the Center Square. It's Wednesday, July 29th, 2026, and I'm your host, Greg Bishop.
1 million Americans died from COVID-19. Some estimate as many as 15 million people died worldwide from COVID-19. Publicly, Anthony Fauci promoted the theory that the virus arose naturally, while privately, he was well aware of a mountain of evidence suggesting the virus originated in the lab. The American people deserve answers. Do you swear that the testimony you will give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
Although it pains me to do so, because of the respect I have for the legislative branch of government and my decades-long record of cooperating with Congress, under the advice of my attorneys, I will invoke my right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution to refrain from answering your questions. Thank you.
Well, the man who led the U.S. response to the global pandemic in 2020 telling Congress today that he wouldn't answer questions about it. Anthony Fauci, former director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, said he'd invoke his Fifth Amendment rights to protect against self-incrimination in a hearing about his role of the public health official during the COVID-19 pandemic. Fauci, who's 85 years old, was subpoenaed by the U.S. Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs. U.S. Senator Rand Paul issued that subpoena to compel his testimony.
The committee asked for your voluntary cooperation to come today. Your appearance had to be compelled by subpoena. You're here today under duress. You're here today because of the court ordering it. President Biden issued you a sweeping pardon extending back to 2014, the same pardon he gave to his son Hunter. A pardon may protect a person from criminal prosecution, doesn't rewrite history. It does not erase documents. It does not convert a misleading statement into a truthful one. And it does not prevent Congress from establishing what happened.
Now, Fauci criticized Paul's pursuit of his leadership during the coronavirus pandemic. He said Paul has an obvious obsession with him. Paul pointed to documents released as part of the Senate's investigation into the pandemic, where Fauci appeared to acknowledge COVID-19's origins from a leak at a lab in Wuhan, China. Paul also mentioned several virologists and top scientists in Fauci's circle who acknowledged the possibility of the virus leaking from a lab.
How did you come to the conclusion that a totalitarian country would be capable of doing this in a BSL-2 lab, a lab that lacked the security? What was the reasoning? And are you sorry, basically, for making the decision? Would you, given another chance, say, well, gosh, circumstances now, as I know it, maybe it wasn't a wise thing. Can you explain to the committee why you chose to fund this dangerous research in China?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
Now, that was just one moment that Fauci pleaded the Fifth. He was then pelted with questions from other members, including Missouri U.S. Senator Josh Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, nothing says honesty like taking the Fifth, huh, Doc? Let's try something. What day of the week is it today?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
What color tie are you wearing?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
What color is the carpet in front of you?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment.
You were using federal employees with taxpayer money to apply for and solicit cash prizes for you personally. Cash prizes totaling over $1 million. You did all of that during the pandemic, didn't you? That's a question.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
You called yourself the most famous scientist in the world. You've done more to harm science than anybody in my lifetime. And I hope you'll go home and write that in your diary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now, in his opening statement, Fauci said he was concerned that Senator Paul would seek to arrest him based off his testimony, regardless of his pardon. Paul also pointed to potential conflicts of interest Fauci had to support gain-of-function research in China. He said Fauci financially supported critical labs in China. Senator Gary Peters, a Democrat from Michigan, he criticized the committee's decision to subpoena Fauci and hold that hearing.
More than 1 million Americans lost their lives, and this committee should absolutely continue to examine how we can better prepare our nation against future biological threats. Those are the kinds of forward-looking, life-saving questions that will help our nation be better prepared to protect the health and the safety of Americans when the next emergency occurs. Unfortunately, at this precise moment, we should be strengthening our capabilities. The Trump administration seems to be doing everything in their power to actually weaken our capabilities. The administration has hollowed out the public health workforce. They have fired, pushed out, and cut funding for public health personnel, shrinking the CDC workforce by a quarter.
Now, Paul said Peters' assertions were categorically false. Paul also slammed Fauci for not answering his questions and said the former health director will face consequences for refusing to testify. Ultimately, Paul said the issue of public confidence is important.
There will be another pandemic. There will be another crisis. And there will again be officials who insist that uncertainty must be hidden for the public's own good. They will demand obedience. They will invoke science. I am the science, as though it were a commandment. They will argue that government officials cannot be questioned because questioning them would undermine public trust. They have it backwards. It is secrecy that destroys trust. It is arrogance that destroys trust. It is censorship that destroys trust. And it is the refusal to admit error that destroys trust. That loss of trust may be your most damaging legacy.
You can go get the latest on today's hearing at thecentersquare.com. Now, another issue that's being reported across the country at thecentersquare.com is that of data centers. Here are just a few headlines you can find from the past week. President Trump says data center boom will lower Americans' energy costs. In Louisiana, Entergy says Meta will save ratepayers billions. In Nashville, they look to halt data center development for now. And Wisconsinites in a poll say they increasingly believe data center costs outweigh the benefits. Joining us to discuss this further is Dan DiOrio, Executive Vice President of the Data Center Coalition. Dan, thanks for taking time with us here for the States. A lot of headlines. I'm sure you guys see them all over the country. What do you attribute is adding to the growing pushback from local residents and state legislators to the increased demand for data center placements?
Well, I think it comes down to this is an industry that is developing very quickly. We are in an era of unprecedented demand for digital infrastructure, and the industry is building out to really meet that demand and ensure that the U.S. remains the world's leader in advanced technologies while providing the infrastructure that keeps us connected every day. And I think it's certainly true that the data center industry needs to invest, and it is investing in robust community and stakeholder engagement to help communities understand what these projects are and what they aren't. Ultimately, how they will use resources wisely and how they will be of economic benefit to those localities.
Yeah, a lot of the concerns we hear is about resources, energy being one, water being another. But there's also the issue of eminent domain, especially in states like Pennsylvania. State law allows a utility to exercise eminent domain for reasons that include transmission of electricity. Your thoughts on the pushback on that issue, and some residents in rural or even suburban areas worried that it could be a problem for their community?
Well, it's important to remember that data centers do not exercise eminent domain and don't have eminent domain authority. We've just come out of about 20 years of pretty flat electricity load growth, and now data centers are one of several factors influencing increasing electricity demand. And as such, we need to invest in our infrastructure to ensure that we all have reliable, resilient electricity that helps to fuel the 21st century economy. Data centers can play a key role in that. They can provide the large loads, the certainty that helps to facilitate those investments. And we actually see throughout the country where data centers, as that catalyst for investment, are helping to lower residential rates for residential ratepayers. We see it in Indiana, in Georgia, as you mentioned, in energy, as well as even a place like California.
When it comes to that side of this equation, do you feel that things have been skewed too much on the critic side versus what you're laying out here and what we've seen reported elsewhere, that data centers are going to be bringing their own energy supply, could help lower rates, could even bring in a whole bunch of property taxes locally to help offset the cost to regular mom and pop and residential property taxes?
Yeah, the facts and the data have to matter in this conversation, most importantly. And I think we know that data centers bring significant economic benefits. In 2024 alone, the industry directly and indirectly employed over 5 million people in the U.S., contributing $926 billion to U.S. GDP and $204 billion in federal, state, and local tax revenue. We know communities are reinvesting that in schools, in infrastructure, and services, and they're helping to lower tax burdens in places like Loudoun County or Columbia County, Georgia, where residents will see their tax bills lowered, their tax burden in that community lowered because of data center revenue coming in. We have to answer important questions about resource use, as we mentioned, energy, but also water. Data centers are amongst the most efficient water users in the economy. So we need to have the facts and the data and the context in these conversations to ensure that communities are having those conversations appropriately, are answering the right questions, and ultimately are making an informed decision.
Now, the internet's global, of course, but how crucial is it that the United States lead in this area of data center development and to get it right?
It's absolutely crucial. We know how to lead in this space. We know how to do it right. But most importantly, there are other countries that have the ability to build out this infrastructure, and they are building out this infrastructure very, very quickly. And that includes both the digital side, but also the energy side. It is essential that the U.S. remains the world's leader in these technologies, because we can do it responsibly, and we can build responsibly and apply it responsibly. But I think as we look at our lives today, it is absolutely crucial that we have the ability to store Americans' data here at home safely and securely. This is a national security imperative.
Dan, several years ago in Illinois, you had legislators from both parties and Democratic Governor J.B. Pritzker say, hey, we want to encourage data center development. And they gave some carve out for tax breaks to these developments. But now Governor Pritzker and some legislators changing their tune. Here's the governor at a recent conference, and I'll get your comment afterwards.
I felt like we needed to not be contributing to that problem, and instead, let's say, especially because these data center companies and the large tech companies have the resources to bring energy with them, how about if we say, we're not going to incentivize you. We're going to tell you that you've got to bring energy with you if you're going to come, and you've got to have closed loop systems that make sure that you're not contaminating our water or taking too much of our water and costing people in your utility bills water and electricity. So that really was the intention of my putting a pause on the tax credits.
Now, your thoughts on this, having put those tax credits out there several years ago, and then you've got this public uproar pushing back on data center development, and the governor now putting a hold on those tax credits.
Well, these tax exemptions are an essential component of data center economic development. They provide certainty and predictability for reinvesting in that facility over many years. They apply to the servers. The servers change over about every 3 to 5 years, and that accounts for evolutions in technologies. New chips coming out are 25% more energy efficient. That exemption provides a valuable incentive to ensure that communities are served by the most up-to-date equipment and the most energy efficient equipment. I worry that this is going to ultimately have and be a long-term detriment to fostering economic development in the state of Illinois and elsewhere.
Well, Dan DiArio, Executive Vice President of the Data Center Coalition, we're going to have to bring you back on to discuss this further, because it doesn't seem like it's going to quiet down anytime soon when it comes to the data center development debate. Greatly appreciate you joining the States. We'll be right back with more.
There's all kinds of things that weren't even contemplated when the first cell phone ban went into place in the state. So we're going to have to keep, evaluating these things. But again, it's about sort of being flexible and also taking into account that we really want kids to pay attention in classrooms.
That's Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker yesterday after signing the bell-to-bell cell phone ban in Illinois. And Illinois joins a majority of the country that have some kind of cell phone prohibition in place. Welcome back to the States. I'm Greg Bishop. Now, some states have bell-to-bell bans in classrooms, including Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, New York, North Carolina, Ohio, Texas, Virginia, and Wisconsin. Other states have district guidelines or recommendations, like Minnesota and Washington. In Illinois, State Senator Christina Castro, who sponsored the cell phone ban in schools, she laid out the various particulars of Illinois' bill.
K through middle school, there is a bell-to-bell ban, right? So meaning from the minute the kids get into the schools, however the school district does it, U46 obviously does the pouches, they put it in a pouch. Their job is to focus from bell to bell. The reason we made the difference in high school is because you have a lot of students who do dual, like in this district, do credit, sometimes go part of the day and then go to work. So, and also you're giving them a little bit more responsibility. So a district can go ahead and give that exception for lunch and passing period for them to have access to their phones.
Now, the Center Square Illinois reporter Sean Reed reports many specifics on how bans will be enforced are left up to local school boards in Illinois, which have a full school year until they must adopt a policy that fits within the law's minimum requirements. Now, the bill didn't specifically spell out how school districts will pay for implementing the ban, which has been common in other states for products like magnetic locking bags to secure phones throughout the day. Now, Pritzker and multiple lawmakers, they highlighted that legislation was unique to other states. However, noting community involvement in tailoring a phone policy. For the pouches that Castro mentioned, it would cost local taxpayers across the state a total of $47 million in Illinois to buy a pouch and associated locking mechanisms for every public school student at the rate the district paid. Now, in February, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer signed into law a bill banning K-12 students from using smartphones during the school day. House Bill 4141, which failed to pass last summer, it passed the House and Senate overwhelmingly at the beginning of the year. A Wisconsin bill would ban student cell phones used throughout the school day, expanding on a previous law that requires all school districts to approve a plan to prohibit cell phones during instructional time by July 1st, but that measure failed on concurrence. In Pennsylvania, there was an attempt in the state house. State Representative Russ Diamond, he pushed for that cell phone ban.
Does a cell phone in a kid's hand serve the needs of a Commonwealth when they're in school? No, it does not. Does a cell phone in a kid's hand make our public education system efficient? No, it does not. Does a cell phone in a kid's hand make our public education system thorough? In some limited cases, and they're accepted out by this bill, a cell phone might make it more thorough for a kid. But I would argue, even in those cases, Madam Speaker, a more task-oriented, dedicated device would be better than a cell phone.
But not everyone was on board. The Pennsylvania House chamber was split, even among the parties. State Representative Greg Vitale, he said he talked to his local school districts, and they had issues with that proposal.
My school district, for example, its policy is not to prohibit cell phones for the entire day on the entire school grounds, but rather to prohibit cell phones during instructional times. That's a choice they've made. That's because they feel that's best for this suburban middle-class school district. Other school districts can make different choices, and we all could change those choices as circumstances and experience dictate. But to have this one-size-fits-all, this, talking point popular policy. It may be popular, but it's the wrong decision from a policy perspective.
Now, that measure was approved by the Pennsylvania House and sent to the Senate, but that chamber already had passed a cell phone school ban. But the bill's language was much different than what was contained in the House bill. As for other technologies outside of cell phones, Florida parents will have the choice to opt their children in or out of using artificial intelligence instructional tools in classroom settings under a new rule being considered by the Florida Department of Education. The proposed changes to the internet safety policy would set minimum requirements for school districts to adopt regarding the use of AI for educational purposes. And in New York, Governor Kathy Hochul is putting social media companies on notice that new regulations limiting teens' access to addictive features on their platforms are now in effect. Speaking to reporters this week in New York City, Hochul said her administration's planning to crack down on Meta, Instagram, and other social media giants as she rolled out final regulations to enforce New York's Stop Addictive Feeds Exploitation or KIDS Act, which was signed by the governor more than 2 years ago. That law prohibits social media platforms from providing addictive algorithm feeds to people under the age of 18 without parental consent. It also bans companies from sending notifications to minors between midnight and 6 a.m. without parental consent. So what do you think? Should schools prohibit students from using cell phones and other technology during school hours? Or do you think it should be a case-by-case and district-by-district case? Well, leave a comment below. We'll be right back with more from the States. A recent $30 million FastTrack grant to Starbucks in Tennessee, which that Starbucks is opening an office in Nashville, renewed scrutiny of the state's FastTrack program. And a recent report at thecentersquare.com shows 2 companies that received previous grants for job creation failed to meet their obligations and are repaying those taxpayer dollars back. Welcome back to the States. I'm Greg Bishop, and let's bring in the Center Square Associate Editor Kim Jarrett with the latest on this story. Kim, we've talked about this program in the past here on the States in regards to Starbucks, but the team digging more into this in the Fast Track program shows it's got some issues. Tell us about the program again and what the state's doing if promises aren't kept by companies that are getting taxpayer funds.
So the reason this story is so important, the money for Fast Track grants comes out of Tennessee's general fund. That general fund comes from sales tax. Tennessee gets most of its money from sales tax because it does not have an income tax. So if you're going to Walmart or whatever grocery store you choose and buying groceries, part of your money is going to fund this program. This program sends money to companies, and in turn, the companies promise to create jobs. So what we've been looking into is what happens if a company does not fulfill its promise. We have found that 71 companies since 2016 did not fulfill their promise. Some of them are in judgments that they are trying to recoup. There is still about $6.1 million in ongoing litigation, and some companies are actually paying the money back. For example, what is happening with Novanix, which is a company in Chattanooga, Tennessee, they are paying back their money. They have already paid $250,000 of the $3 million grant that they received. They're paying the rest of it off in payments, but they do have to pay interest per part of their contract.
Yeah, and you mentioned the overall process here of these clawbacks. I think it's important people see some of the data you guys were able to find here, looking at some documents and talking to officials, these clawbacks. And if people aren't familiar with what a clawback is, as Kim laid out, listen, if you got a program that's saying, hey, we're going to give you some funds if you promise this, well, what happens if you can't fulfill that promise? Well, are those tax dollars just poof gone in the air? Not so much. In Tennessee, the FastTrack clawbacks, it creates the provisions that if a job creator does not make 90% of the jobs promised, then they have to repay some of that grant, and it's based off of proportion. But, Kim, this is interesting. If they create fewer than 50% of the jobs, they have to repay that entire grant back.
Mm-hmm. Or in the case of Nippon Paint, which also is just paid back its money, they didn't create any of the jobs that they promised. So they did pay back their $1.1 million grant on July 2nd, we were told, by the Department of Economic and Community Development. And that's why we're tracking this money. This is taxpayer money. We have a spreadsheet where we know what money is being clawed back. We filed an open records request for that spreadsheet. Johnny Edwards, who was with our investigative unit at the Center Square, and we compare that with what is online. The Department of Community and Economic Development does have a transparency page. It shows every time there is a FastTrack grant awarded. Now, there is one interesting thing about FastTrack grants. If they're over $750,000, they need approval from the state funding board. But if they're not, they just are able to go through. So we are keeping an eye not only on the ones where there's millions of dollars going through, but some of those smaller grants too.
And you had mentioned one of the companies, the Nippon Paint, and they are paying back all of their $1.1 million in grants. But 71 companies, Kim, you guys are finding, didn't fulfill their promises since 2016 with that award total of nearly $170 million. And the overall aim was to create 24,000 jobs, but only 7,400 jobs were created. 8 companies had judgments against them. $8.8 million or more of the $10 million owed has been collected, but there's still a lot of dollars that are being tied up because of litigation. Tell us about that.
And that's exactly this in the contract. It says the state can take them to court if they do not fulfill their obligations and they don't willingly pay the money back. The companies are given a deadline. In the case of Novonix, they were given 45 days to pay the money back or make an arrangement with the state, which they did. So there is a vetting process too. It's important to note that the Commissioner of Economic Development, Stuart McWhorter, says, well, we are vetting these companies to make sure that, let's say something happens and they can't create however many jobs that they promised. Well, we vetted these companies in hopes that we know that they will be able to pay this money back.
It's a fascinating story. We hear a lot about, a variety of different dollars going out for different programs and all the questionable fraud that there might be concerning Medicaid dollars. But this being a totally different avenue for proposed job creation and using tax dollars to lure certain companies in, like Starbucks, for instance, $30 million they're looking to get. That is a pretty large chunk of the $169 million that is between 2016 and now of companies that didn't fulfill their promise. How closely are you guys going to be watching that Starbucks grant?
Oh, we have been watching already, almost on a daily basis. We've been talking to lawmakers. This has even become an issue in the gubernatorial race, where we have 3 Republican candidates. They've been asked, what do you think about the FastTrack grants? And we have 2 of the candidates saying they believe it's corporate welfare. The leading candidate, U.S. Senator Marsha Blackburn, she said she thinks that the state will recoup the money from Starbucks because these are well-paying jobs that are coming to Nashville. So she says she doesn't have concerns. So everybody is beginning to talk about it. This is not a new issue, but it wasn't until Starbucks received the $30 million that people started talking again.
Just to kind of go through some of these statistics again from 2016, 71 companies not fulfilling their promise. Total awards $169 million, but when you get to what's been collected so far, it's a drop in the bucket, $8.1 million. That's quite a chunk of change. Maybe another area to investigate is the taxpayer cost of actually having to go after and claw back these funds, considering some of these cases are tied up in the courts. But Kim, are these grants needed? It's an interesting question that even Democratic State Representative Afton Bean of Nashville brought up in April, saying that the FastTrack funds should be moved to instead help small businesses in Tennessee. Here she is from the Tennessee floor back in April.
Tennessee clawed back $18.4 million from 17 companies that received over $53.6 million from the FastTrack program. Those companies also failed to deliver over 8,000 jobs. Pure Foods took $1.2 million, promising 273 jobs to a Northeast Tennessee community. It declared bankruptcy within a year and never hired a single person. MIA Seating took $4 million, promising 510 jobs, and delivered 55. Textile Corporation of America took $3 million of our tax dollars, promising over 1,000 jobs in Pikeville. Its owners pleaded guilty to wire fraud and money laundering. The Business Enterprise Resource Office serves small businesses in the state. So if we are serious about economic development, let's put our money where our mouth is.
You know, it's interesting to hear just even more examples, Kim, than what you guys have highlighted in your latest work on this. I think it's an interesting question. Is this something that's even worth it?
Well, we asked that to Representative Ryan Williams in an interview that we did right before our second story published, and he says yes. Why? He says it's because Tennessee doesn't have a state income tax. We got to find a way to kind of increase our tax base, so so we'll have that. Tennessee right now has a $58.3 billion budget. So, hey, if you're not bringing in income taxes, and let's say the sales tax declines, this economic development, well, they believe will help them, have more money for the budget.
Well, it's definitely something we'll keep watching and touch base with you and the team at the Center Square about these FastTrack grants. Kim Jarrett, Associate Editor for the Center Square, greatly appreciate your time joining us here on The States. We'll be right back. Municipal elections in 91 of 100 North Carolina counties in 2025 collectively cost $8.4 million for the 822,000 ballots cast, according to a new analysis. And it begs the question on just how much does it cost taxpayers per vote? Welcome back to The States. I'm Greg Bishop. Now, after elections, local news outlets across the country, they may look at a campaign's finance to see just how much they spent and see how many votes they got to either win an election or to lose an election, and how much it cost per vote. Now, while intriguing, those campaign funds are private dollars voluntarily provided by a voter to a candidate. But a recent audit in North Carolina delves into the question on the taxpayer cost per vote. The Center Square managing editor Alan Wooten reports in North Carolina, the roughly $10 a ballot had extremes of $1,517 for each of the 5 ballots cast in tiny Camden County, and $5.83 for the nearly 221,000 counted and heavily populated Mecklenburg County. Now, the performance audits from the Office of First-Term Republican State Auditor Dave Bolek broke down the average cost per vote to about $126 for small counties, $23 for medium-sized counties, and $14 for large counties. You can see how it depends on the size of the budget for that particular county. It depends on how much money they're getting from state coffers. It depends also on what the voter turnout is. When you have a primary election and 30% turnout to vote, well, that's probably going to increase the amount per vote taxpayers had to spend for those who actually went to the polls. Now, this was not just for municipal elections. Far from the other elections that we have, a lot of states, there's 7.8 million voters participating in this year's election in North Carolina. Now, absentee ballots go out into the mail September 4th, or 5 weeks from this coming Friday. Now, what about the average cost across the country? Well, that's an interesting question that's hard to get to an answer. In 2018, researchers from MIT's Election Data and Science Lab, they asked that question, and they found some interesting things. First, they said the true nationwide average of the taxpayer cost for each vote cast is not a known number. In 2000, they say a study was done by Caltech MIT called Voting, What Is, What Could Be. They estimated the cost of an election at about $1 billion over the entirety of the United States, which they calculated to be about $10 per voter. Now, the report noted that localities spent more on solid waste management and parks than they did on elections. They also noted no central location for election cost data, not to mention no standardization for ways to report such data. Now, the most recent update from MIT in 2018, it shows that turnout, provisional votes, and registered voters, no scholars that they were aware of, have unearthed cost data in a systemic and nationwide approach. But even then, the MIT study in 2018, they did look at 27 states' financials, and there was a great variation in state laws and practices concerning budgeting, expense reports, and of course, electoral institutions. For example, some states have early voting, some have vote by mail, and you can see how these policies can change from state to state and sometimes jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Now, from the total 26 states, including that MIT analysis done, the mean cost per eligible voter in the U.S. for the years 2009 to 2016 was about $8.10 per vote, with the median being $7.08. Standard deviation of $6.50. Now, looking at some particular states that they weren't able to collect all this data for, North Dakota provided the highest cost per vote with $111.57 per vote. New Mexico had the lowest at $7.07 for their maximum. Now, back to the Center Square story of the audit in North Carolina, it found that personnel cost taxpayers about $5.1 million and was the biggest driver in costs. Operating costs totaled $2.1 million to taxpayers, and use of building and space was about $1.1 million. And there were other significant factors borne by participating municipalities and various special districts. Then there's the other costs that can be part of state mandates being handed down to local elections officials, or even federal mandates that may be handed down to states. Is the effort to streamline things to make it more unified and costly important and worth it? Or is the decentralized election system practiced by the United States the best way to ensure election integrity? Leave your comment below. We'll be right back with more from the States. Welcome back to the States. Now it's time for America's Talking, with headlines from across the country that you can find in the description below or in your inbox with the Center Square newsletter, free at thecentersquare.com. An Arizona federal judge denied a temporary restraining order to block part of a state law that allows Arizona to protect its borders with Mexico. The American Civil Liberties Union and the Florence Immigrant and Refugee Rights Project sued the state earlier this month, challenging a portion of Proposition 314, also known as Arizona's Secure the Border Act. The Center Square contributor Zachary Schmidt reports the suit was filed in the U.S. District Court of Arizona, and Arizona voters passed Proposition 314 by nearly 63% in 2024. The proposition gives Arizona more legal tools and authority to defend its border against illegal immigrants, as well as increased penalties for fentanyl traffickers whose crimes result in deaths. The measure also added eligibility checks for special public benefits. The lawsuit challenged Section 5 of the proposition, which creates a crime of illegal entry into Arizona, as well as allows local and state law enforcement, when probable cause exists, to arrest suspected illegal immigrants entering Arizona outside a lawful port of entry. As Governor Josh Shapiro makes his rounds across the Commonwealth promoting the $50.8 billion state budget he signed into law earlier this month, his Republican challenger is voicing her opposition. State Treasurer Stacey Garrity said in response to a question from the Center Square this week that the budget was, quote, too much money. Garrity, who was elected in a second term as the state's treasurer, said there's still a structural deficit of $4.8 to $5 billion a year. Citing the tax burden Pennsylvanians face, Garrity believes the state can't afford it. She said, quote, we expect families to spend within their means, and our state should be doing the same thing. While that budget was the fifth in a row signed past the constitutionally mandated deadline, it was also the fourth signed in bipartisan fashion since Shapiro took office. New York Governor Kathy Hochul is urging the dairy industry, dairy industry is urging New York Governor Kathy Hochul to veto a bill that would ban food additives, amid claims that it would drive up the cost of groceries. The Center Square contributor Chris Wade reports the International Dairy Foods Association said in a letter to Hochul that New York's Food Safety and Chemical Disclosure Act, which was approved by lawmakers during the recent session, would increase food prices for consumers, thwart innovation in the dairy industry, and ultimately place a significant regulatory and financial burden not only on the industry, but also on the state. The legislation, if approved, would prohibit the use of several harmful substances as food additives or colorful additives in that manufacturing process and commercial distribution of food products, and it would require companies to disclose their secret, generally recognized as safe ingredients to the public. And a bill to enact more legislative oversight of California's next-gen 911 system will be implemented as part of the state's budget this year, according to one lawmaker. The Center Square, California reporter Madeline Shannon reports Assembly member Rhodesia Ransom announced that provisions of Assembly Bill 1805, which she authored, will be implemented as part of the budget instead of being considered as separate legislation. The legislature approved the state's $350 billion budget in June, and Governor Gavin Newsom signed it. But lawmakers can still make revisions. Assembly Bill 1805's oversight and accountability measure will be added as line items in the state's budget and would take effect immediately once the Democratic governor signed those items into law, according to Ransom. Now, Newsom hasn't said whether he would sign them. The provisions of Ransom's bill that would be included in the budget are requirements that the California Office of Emergency Services, which oversees the rollout of the next-gen 911 system, to submit quarterly reports detailing progress. And that's just some of what America is talking about. You can get these and other headlines at thecentersquare.com. From my studios in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop, and join us back here Thursday for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from all around the country, only with The States, powered by the Center Square.